Hey, InterVarsity alumni. This is After 4, your podcast for navigating life after graduation. This is both an exciting and potentially tricky transition that you're making, and you might feel a little unsure about the coming weeks and months. We're here to provide you with expert advice, practical skills, and plenty of encouragement as you learn how to keep saying yes to Jesus in your new context. This is After 4, and this podcast is for you, alumni. What's up, alumni? Welcome to After 4, your podcast for navigating life after graduation. I'm your host and guide, John Steele, and as we have come to enjoy doing together, let's take a moment before we dive into today's topic to read another entry from our alumni yearbook. This week's entry comes from Priscilla Crampet's France, Illinois State University, class of 1987, and Priscilla says, "My words to the class of 2024. Jesus is your BFF. Hang with him all the time, every day, just like you would an earthly BFF. He listens, is always with you, and knows what you're going through. Find a good church and good Christian friends wherever you wind up on the planet." Proverbs 3, 5 through 6. God bless the class of 2024. And this part comes from me, John, just in case you're driving or in the middle of something else and can't remember what Proverbs 3, 5 through 6 is, and you know you'll forget to look it up before you have a chance to do so. So, Proverbs 3, 5 through 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight, or direct your paths, as some translations say. I love this encouragement. I think it's really easy to get it into our heads that somehow it should just be easy to maintain a close, intimate relationship with Jesus, and that if I'm struggling to do that, then there's just something wrong with me. No, developing that kind of bond takes time and intentionality, just like it does with real people, especially in the midst of significant life change and transition. And our best friendships, the ones that truly stand the test of time, can only do that because we've put in significant, consistent time. And the same thing happens with Jesus. Keep putting in the intentional time, and as you look back, you'll see that you've drawn closer and closer, and that you really do have a best friend forever in Jesus, one who's always with you, no matter the season or the transition that you find yourself in. Priscilla, thank you so much for your encouragement. If you're listening and you have a word of encouragement for alumni, or if you've been encouraged by something that you've heard from the alumni yearbook recently, send us an email at alumni@intervarsity.org or a DM at After4Pod on Instagram. We would really love to hear from you. All right, we are moving into our next conversation in this series about navigating conflict. And in addition to the reality that conflict is just going to be part of our lives, I'm also going to give you some other hard news today. And that's that you're wrong. Right here, right now, as you listen to this episode, there's an idea or a belief or a stance that you hold that you're just wrong about. Whether in part or in its completeness, whether you realize it or not, you're wrong about something. I'm wrong about something. And that is one of the many hard parts of conflict that we need to be able to navigate well. How do I know when I'm wrong? And what do I do once I realize that I'm wrong? Well, that's what we're covering today and next week. We are joined by Reverend Jonna Fantz, former InterVarsity staff, pastor, spiritual director, and perpetual student. So, with all of those experiences, whether within herself or with others, she's navigated the waters of being wrong many times. And Jonna is going to help us gather up some tools that are going to be really helpful for us in discerning if we might be wrong about an idea that we hold. And if so, what our next steps should be. Now, I'm biased because I host this podcast, but I think we stand to learn a lot of really helpful insights from Jonna this week and next, because admitting we're wrong and taking healthy next steps once we realize it is something we all need a lot of help with. So here's Jonna, and this one's for you, alumni. Well, Jonna, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, John. What a pleasure to be here.
I'm really glad that you could be here with us today. We're gonna talk about some potentially challenging things today that really will be, I think an invitation for listeners to spend some time in self-examination, maybe now, or tools to have on hand for down the road when the time is right. But before we jump into those things, Jonna, help me and help our guests get to know you a little bit. Would you just give us a brief introduction?
Sure. Well, it's great to meet your listeners. Thanks so much for tuning in today. I have been in St. Paul, Minnesota for almost 30 years now, or the metro area at least. I was an English major in my undergrad work and was actually a high school English teacher for several years.
Wow.
Now, that was not here in the metro area. That was actually out in Washington State.
Okay.
So I lived out there in the Pacific Northwest for a little while and then felt this tug and call toward ministry. And I came back to Bethel Theological Seminary and got my Master's of Divinity there. And since getting my Master's of Divinity, I have been serving in ministry. So it's over 20 years now of ministry life. And I started my ministry in InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. So
yes.
I was recruited by wonderful, I think he's been one of your guests before, Rick Mattson is his name, a great guy, recruited to be a team leader at the University of Minnesota. And I served there as my first call really into ministry and just came to just love InterVarsity, love its people, love students, love the work that's being done. I'm now ordained in the Evangelical Covenant Church, and I'm also ordained in Converge, which is a Baptist kind of denomination. And I'm also a trained spiritual director.
Okay.
So my current work that I'm doing is I'm actually working for a hospice, doing end of life kind of care for folks.
Okay.
I'm part-time. That's a part-time job. And then I've got another part-time job where I'm on a preaching team at a Converge church, a local Converge church called Community of Nations.
Okay.
And I'm a spiritual director. So I have a practice of my own. I do have a wonderful husband. We've been married almost 10 years.
Oh, nice.
And he brought two 20-something sons to the marriage.
Wow.
And so, I went from like single girl to like matriarch of the tribe of men, but it's been amazing and wonderful and a real growing experience. So that's a little bit about me.
Yes, I love that. That's amazing. It's so great to hear all of these different places that you've been able to invest time. It's good to know that you've had, time engaging with InterVarsity as a staff. Like you get the culture, you understand, you're going to understand the some of our audience who we're speaking to today. I really appreciate that. And because of the many different places that you have served and just spent time, I'm guessing that you, whether it's helping other people with it or just even yourself, you're going to have some interesting experiences with our topic today. Yes. Oh my goodness. So we are in a series that's about navigating conflict, navigating disagreement, even, dare I say, engaging with people that we might consider enemies or who might consider us their enemies. And so what does it look like to step into those things graciously and humbly and to be able to have healthy conversations around conflict? And as we experience these things, one of the ideas that I wanted us to be able to talk about is, what if I'm the one who's wrong? Because undoubtedly we will experience conflict, and undoubtedly at some point, or probably at many points, if we're really being honest with ourselves, we're going to realize that we might be the problem. And so what do I do in those moments? And so that's my hope for us today, is that we can provide alumni with some sort of a helpful framework for discerning if we need to change our minds or our behavior about something.
What a great topic. What a great topic, John. And I want to say, just sort of a way to kind of begin this is, just so you know, you and I and everyone listening right now in this moment is wrong about something.
Yes.
Every one of us. This is an existential reality. of being human and being on a developmental pathway is that we all right now are wrong about something, and we'll be wrong about something until the day we die. I mean, it's
Yes.
there does I think this ability to acknowledge that it's the truth is we're all wrong about stuff,
Hmm.
and that ability to accept that, acknowledge that, and then navigate that well. What a brilliant life skill that our current culture is in desperate need of.
Yes. Yes, I totally agree. If for the reasons that you've already stated about just our human nature, that we get stuff wrong, and because it feels like we live in a time where we must be right.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with like the idea of wanting to, like, I want to get stuff right. I think that's a noble thing to desire. I want, not for the sake of me being right, like I'm right and you're wrong and that's the way I want it to be, but for the sake of like, no, I'm thinking correctly. I'm doing the things that I feel like God is leading me into. This would be God's heart on this, and I want to be in tune with God's heart. But I'm human.
Yeah, and I call that what you just described there, John, so brilliantly, is this difference between hungering for truth and hungering for power.
Oh,
That we're longing to be right because we hunger to live within the truth.
yes.
And we are relating salvifically with the truth. And so we long to be in the truth. But there is a hunger to be right that is all about power. But those are two different things. Like you can hunger for truth and still not want to have power over necessarily or crushing others. So I love that you've defined that difference, because I think in our culture, truth and power have become really melded. And I think it's really helpful to pull them apart for this conversation.
Yes. Your framing of that is very helpful for me to put that kind of language to it. So that's helpful of hungering for truth versus hungering for power, and trying to separate those things as we talk about being wrong. And we will have Rick Mattson back on the show, and we'll be talking about the idea of being right. But that's for another episode. We're gonna live in being wrong for today.
That's perfect.
Well, Jonna, the thing that I want to start us off with, not to put you on the spot here necessarily, but is there a time that you can look back on where you have had to sort of work through this process of, am I wrong? I think I might be wrong about this, and what did you do?
Yeah. So, okay. So like this happens almost every other day for me. I do feel like, I just I'm a hungry learner, student of the world kind of a person. And so when you are hungry about understanding more things, you inevitably end up being wrong about stuff that you thought before. But I thought the story I might go to that might be maybe most helpful, particularly for people that are fresh out of IB in college, just is that it is exactly at that time in my life. I was fresh out of college. I had moved to Washington to teach high school English. And the church that I became involved in, it was a Foursquare church is the name of the denomination. And it's a denomination that's a little bigger out on the coast. But for those of you who don't know, this was a denomination that was founded by a fiery evangelist named Amy Semple McPherson.
Okay.
And she is the founder of the denomination, and it's grown, and so they embrace women in leadership, and particularly women in ministry, really encouraging women to step into a full call in ministry. So I had grown up in a tradition that was very loving, really wonderful place to grow. I mean, I am so grateful for my tradition, but women couldn't even serve communion in that particular. That's how really careful they were about women asserting authority or having any kind of, teaching or grace-giving role in the denomination or in the church. I was given the text. I was given a really simple, clear way of understanding how things were.
Yeah.
And I did have examples along the way of women who really were leading. I was brought to faith by a woman, mentored by women, and then when I went off to college, I actually had a woman who was a pastor, but I didn't really, she was under the authority of a male, so it all seemed to kind of fit. And I did have other gifts. I had teaching gifts, I had leadership gifts, but I just assumed would be used with children and women. That must be why God has given them to me. But then I went off and suddenly joined this denomination where women are leading, and in our church, the majority of the elders were women. Our pastor actually asked me to preach one Sunday because he recognized teaching, and he asked me to lead the adult Sunday school. And there was just this period for me of not knowing, like kind of just, okay, I don't really know what's going on here. I began to ask questions. I began to have conversations. And I just remember a time of really being what I call spongy. Like, I'm just going to read a lot. I'm going to try to understand a lot. I'm going to explore my own tradition more deeply and try to understand where they're coming from. And I had to do a really deep study of some texts. One of my good friends at that time became Christians for Biblical Equality because they are passionately rooted in Orthodox Christianity and passionate that part of the strength of the church is that women are called into leadership. Deep scholars and thinkers addressing the texts and helping me think through that whole experience. So then there became this, so you move from kind of unknowing and you're just collecting and collecting. And then it feels like things kind of begin to settle a little bit. Like you begin to understand some things. I always call it, you get some handholds. Like, okay, I may not understand everything, but I suddenly feel like I've got a real grasp on this.
Yeah.
And in the end, obviously, I came to embrace that position very fully. And it was actually shortly after that God began the tug toward ministry. So it was this long, I would say it was a 2 to 3 year process for me because it was such a deeply held belief that it felt really uncomfortable. Like there were some things that I was going to have to, I was going to become one of those women. There were just things that weren't completely comfortable for me. And am I okay with that? Is it okay with me? Do I stay who I am as I let go of this belief and accept a new one?
Yeah. Even as we talk about the idea of conflict, it's clear that this conflict wasn't just sort of interpersonal, that this was like there was a lot of internal conflict that you were working through that then as you were living out this new mindset that then did result probably in some interpersonal conflict in one way or another.
This
is such an interesting and really helpful story as we think about what it looks, and some of the things that you've named already I think are going to provide some tools that we can use as we think through this process of, okay, this is the way that I've grown up. These are the things that I was taught. These are even the places that I fit really nicely into what seems like should be the way that I think and practice. But I'm starting to think that maybe I'm off about some of this stuff. Right. And what do I do in that process? So Jonna, as you think about your story, or even as we think about coming to terms with the possibility of being wrong about something, like are there some healthy indicators that the position that I'm holding might be wrong, that might be something that I need to reconsider?
Right. I was thinking about this too. I actually had a dinner with a friend last night who's been a missionary in Japan for 30 years.
Wow.
And so I just said, I want to poke at something with you. Her name is Shan. And I just said, Shan, can we just talk about this topic a little bit? And so we kind of came up with like, how do we know? So
Yeah.
there's like this feeling almost in my body when
Hmm.
I'm like, something's going on here.
Yeah.
And one of them is that emotionally, I get extremely defensive. So
Interesting.
I'm this curious person who doesn't usually feel threatened by new ideas or by something or someone else's perspective that I may not agree with you, but I don't
Yeah.
really feel threatened by that. But when I feel this rise up in me of defensiveness, it's often a sign that something's getting shook up and I
Yeah.
don't feel quite as safe. Something feels less secure to me. So my own defensiveness often is one of the signs. We also both agreed that you kind of can't stop thinking about it. Like whatever it was, it was a conversation off here and you want to get on and you just keep finding it coming back again. It's like your mind is just chewing on something and wondering about something. Or in the conversation, something happens where you just feel like, I've never even thought about that part of this. It's like a piece of the puzzle suddenly comes in, and then you realize
Hmm.
you have this, I had this picture done, but suddenly because this new piece came in, I realized the puzzle is like way bigger than I thought.
Yeah.
I need to say, it's okay. Here's what I think this is about, but there might be a lot more going on here because I feel just shook up like, wow, there's a whole new world to explore and wonder about and be curious about. Another thing that I think happens is that someone that we deeply respect suddenly expresses a view that opposes ours. Now
Hmm.
that doesn't necessarily mean we're wrong, but it often is an indicator that gosh, someone who I've learned so much from, who I've deeply respected, holds another view that I have. It's just a like, okay, let's keep an open heart here. Let's keep an open mind. If they can think that, let's get curious about that. Let's find out more about that. Those were some of the like indicators to in that conversation that felt like
Yeah.
really became clear for both of us. So
That makes so much sense to me. I mean, I would almost call all of those warning lights, and one of those
nice.
like if any one of those goes off, it doesn't necessarily like you don't need like, okay, I need to abandon everything I've thought about this.
Good Lord, no.
But that if you start seeing some combination of those things coming up and coming up
Yeah.
consistently, that it's like, okay, I get defensive whenever this conversation comes up. I can't stop, and then I can't put it down. Like once the conversation comes up, I keep mulling over this topic again and again and again. New pieces of the puzzle come into view that like, wow, I don't know how I feel about that, but I've not considered that before. And somebody that I respect
Yeah.
holds this view. And okay, maybe this is something that I need to really spend some time putting myself in somebody else's shoes, not just researching all of the avenues that I
Arguments.
typically yes, not just all of the arguments against, not just all
Right.
of the articles that I typically go to, but starting to actually consider maybe I need to learn more about from this person's perspective about
Right.
this idea. And so how do I research well in this process of,
Mm.
okay, I think I'm wrong. I think I might be wrong about this. Like what's my next step and how do I pursue those things in a healthy way?
Yeah, that's great. So, first of all, I want to just say, I kind of always want to encourage people to just take a deep breath and have some self compassion
Hmm.
because the polarization in our society creates, it's really difficult to hold this exploration space.
Yeah.
You are looked at as waffling, as even if you've held a position, you're seen as a traitor. I mean, there just isn't this. Our dialogue, our intellectual life right now is not kind to this process. So be kind to yourself. And I would say find some safe people to talk to. I know I went back and actually called old college professors when I was in my transformation process of coming to understand this. And I actually talked to professors on both sides of the issue that were able to kind of frame out for me and even offer me articles because they were in academia. And again, this was the 80s. There might have been a little more humility. I'm not sure, but they were able to say, well, here's a great article on the other side. Here's an article here, or let me just scramble your eggs. Here might be a perspective you haven't even thought about. You know. But I did go back to people I knew and trusted and asked for information. And I really believe engaging in prayer in these places, even if it's like, you're like, well, this isn't a religious topic, our faith permeates everything. We can always pray. So I always say, seek the resource of God. He has a way of getting us the tools we need, getting us the information we need. Recognize that there's an emotional and spiritual journey that is going on in the midst of owning I might be wrong about something. And I also want to say that sometimes the stakes of being wrong are fairly small. It's not an issue that we're deeply invested in. It might even be something that we just were like, I've never really thought about that before. I would have just said this, but I hadn't really thought about it. And so you don't have this huge investment and it doesn't feel as tumultuous and significant. So just recognize the more tumult, recognize the more you probably have invested in this. You've actually spent time. This is coming at a cost to you. And I want to be kind as a spiritual director. When I sit with people and they are in this process, I want to offer them extreme kindness. I want to give them space for grief because they may be like, there are resources or years or relationships that this has cost me. And I have to own the cost of that. I have to grieve the cost of that. Sometimes there's work to do where you go back and say, hey, I'm just firing off an email to you. Our friendship ended years ago, or we got in this huge argument. And I feel like the way I handled that, I'm not proud of. Or, there can be a lot of kind of reckoning with things, and sometimes not. Sometimes it's not something we've ever invested heavily in, but we're noticing we're on a journey. But I always think, be kind to yourself, especially if if the change has a high cost, if there's a big price to pay.
I really hope you hear those closing words, alumni. Be kind to yourself. Recognizing you're wrong and walking through the process of changing your mind isn't easy. There's so much history, nostalgia, good intentions, and probably even some baggage that comes along with it, and it just takes time. And as you show yourself kindness in the process, remember to show kindness to others while they walk through this journey as well. But just to make sure that we're not letting ourselves off the hook here, take a second to write down those indicators that Jonna mentioned in the first place. If we find ourselves easily and inordinately defensive about a topic or a perspective, if we just can't stop thinking about an interaction that we had with someone about it, if we encounter previously unconsidered information, and if someone we trust, someone we respect, holds an opposing view, it may be time to consider the possibility that we're wrong, or at the very least, that a topic needs more unbiased exploration. And if you're wondering how to do that well, you're in luck. That's where we'll pick things back up next week. We're going to discuss a helpful posture for exploring alternate ideas and what to do when we get stuck because none of the options seem like helpful answers to our questions. So be sure to come back next week. Until then, thanks for tuning in, and I will see you in the after, alumni. Hey, thanks so much for joining us today, alumni. If there was anything that you learned, really enjoyed, or that encouraged you from today's episode, would you send us a DM or tag us in a story? We'd love to hear about it. You can find us at After4Pod on Instagram and Facebook. And if you haven't already, take just a second to unlock your phone and subscribe to the podcast. If your platform lets you, leave us a rating and a review. And if you like what we're doing here, share us with your InterVarsity or other post-graduation friends. Thanks again for listening, and I will see you in the after, alumni.